Hello, I'm Dave Feinlieb, and this is Beyond the Shelf. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. You can find out more about how we're helping leading brands and retailers like PepsiCo and Instacart build content at scale and take advantage of our free image and video asset offer at itsrapid.ai. My guest on today's show is Dan LeBlanc, CEO and co-founder of Daasity. Daasity enables brands to pull their multi-channel data into a single source of truth to uncover insights and power smarter business decisions. Prior to Daasity, Dan founded Craft, Cast, and Cork and was vice president of customer intelligence at Provide Commerce, which was acquired by FTD. Dan started his career at Capital One. Please enjoy my conversation with Dan LeBlanc. Dan, welcome to the show.
Dave, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and sharing all this kind of cool information with all the listeners out there.
Would you take us back? How did you get your start in the space?
Yeah, so I worked in financial services for a really long time, as you mentioned, having worked at Capital One. And one of the things that is really interesting about financial services is it's probably one of the most analytically rigorous fields that you can be in. But when you're dealing with credit cards or mortgages, it takes a really long time to see whether something that you did as an employee makes an impact. So in credit cards, you have to wait at least 7 to 12 months to see if some strategy you've developed pays back. And when I started at Capital One, like e-commerce wasn't really a thing. And so in sort of the mid 2000s, I had an opportunity to join a company called ProFlowers in San Diego. And just this allure of, I get to see what happens today, or it's I go do something today and I get to see how it turned out in a week, not a year, was really exciting. So that's why I sort of made the jump from financial services into e-commerce. And I'll say I don't regret it at all.
So it sounds like that immediacy of the feedback is pretty exciting.
It is, and it is like you go make a change on your website and you'll know within a couple of days whether it was a good decision or a bad decision versus a lot of other industries where you make a decision and something happens sort of 12 months down the road and you're sort of, okay, what did I do? What was it that drove that kind of behavior change? And so it's exciting. It's really exciting, sort of the speed and the pace. But that means we have to be on our toes all the time. So there's good and bad because things can also go awry really quick. And so that sort of speed and change is kind of fun, but it's also it can be scary.
I love it. Exciting and scary. Is there something you remember from that time of an experiment you ran or a change you made that stood out for you where you then got to see that quick impact and maybe change things up as a result?
Yeah. I mean, I'll sort of share two experiences. One, it's sort of the Capital One where I worked on a team that was responsible and did a lot of analytics around. We had a co-branded credit card with Lowe's, and my job was to examine consumer behavior to find all the buyers at Home Depot that lived closer to a Lowe's than a Home Depot and try and shift their spend by giving them credit cards and offers. And it took a long time to figure out. I mean, it took us probably a year and a half to figure out whether this was working or not. Whereas you go to, great experience at ProFlowers was we decided to basically implement a $19.99 version of the product versus a $29.99 product. And within, I'd say first, you knew immediately how well that did on a conversion perspective as soon as we put it up. And I mean, it might be not the best in terms of the good, better, best philosophy. It was good, this $19.99 product versus the better $29.99, but it converted pretty well. And And it then took us about another 6 weeks to figure out how retention was trending. And so we knew immediately, like, okay, tend to be worse customers, but as long as we changed the acquisition cost, it still was profitable. And like that took us weeks. Whereas back in the Capital One days, it took us a year and a half to figure out whether this strategy was profitable or not. So just the scale and speed is so different.
Great examples. Now, you've had a number of really great experiences. You went on to work at Provide Commerce, that was acquired by FTD. What are some of your learnings from that time?
Yeah, I think for me, what was really interesting, and I've realized a lot more, is that Provide Commerce was a very data driven organization, and that was one of the benefits that we have. And I think that that's something that I hope brands do that I don't think brands kind of embrace enough today. And I'll share kind of a great example. So the flower industry is probably one of the worst industries out there that you could ever be in. And that's because probably somewhere between 60 and 70% of your sales come on Valentine's Day and Mother's Day. And the rest of the year, nobody really cares. And the value of a dozen roses on February 15th is zero. In fact, maybe you'd even argue that it's negative, right? Like if I was to give my spouse or, flowers on February 15th, I'm not, hey, I love you. I'm sort of in the doghouse, right? So pretty interesting from that perspective. And so the challenge is when your time to go acquire customers and be profitable is very short, how do you predict? And so we were very good at understanding lifetime value and what we could spend. So if I acquire you as a new customer at Valentine's Day, well, you have a mom.
Right.
Everybody has a mom.
Right.
So the likelihood that you're going to buy for Mother's Day is actually pretty high. So I might be willing to take a little bit of a loss on that order. Whereas at Mother's Day, there's no real major buying opportunity until next Valentine's Day that's hugely significant. And so I have to set my threshold to acquire that customer to be different. And this is something like brands don't get to that level of rigor and say, this is my main event. So how many brands go do discounts or they spend more during holiday, but do they adjust their CPO threshold or do they adjust it during different times of the year? These are all things that brands don't do. And that's what was really important out of this experience of Provide Commerce. What was interesting is FTD, that was not their approach. They were not as sophisticated analytically and were much more around, well, we work with local florists and we're like a distribution play. And it turned out being a terrible acquisition, one that they should write business cases about. And that was really because the cultures and the strategic sort of value and differentiation were so different that wasn't a good fit of two organizations. So it's kind of interesting to see two individually very successful companies that had very different strategies to running their business kind of merge and then essentially fall apart.
So if I can parse that apart, one big insight is, as a brand, how do I think about acquisition throughout the year and where I might invest and dial back, and what are my costs and acquisition approaches, not just one-off, but how do they relate to each other and how do I inform that? So I love that. That's a really great insight. The other, I think, is for our folks over in M&A, some learnings on thinking about culture and how that works when you're putting the organizations together. So thank you for both of those. Super interesting. Now, when we were preparing for today's podcast, you mentioned that you never planned to be an entrepreneur. How did you end up being one?
Yeah, it was really because of this ProFlowers FTD experience. I mean, I always thought I was going to be a corporate guy. I sort of, got a job at Capital One, right? Sort of lived in the corporate world and thought I was always going to do that. And what ended up happening is, as kind of the acquisition of ProFlowers by Provide Commerce by FTD, is there are a number of people that were leaving the company and going to smaller e-commerce brands. And because ProFlowers had become so analytically great, these marketers and heads of growth that had worked at ProFlowers were coming back to me and saying, "Can you help me go implement, this analytics at X brand?" And so I ended up starting and just consulting with Movement Watches and Kapari and Rothy's and a couple of others. And then that got me introduced to like Parachute Home and these other brands. And so that just kind of steamrolled. And at some point I was like, okay, I'm too busy. I can't handle this. And I didn't know much. These were all brands that were on Shopify, and they didn't know a lot about Shopify at the time. This was in 2015, 2016. And I went and looked it up. I'm like, wow, there's like 50,000 or 100,000 brands on Shopify, and I'm working with 8 of them or 5 of them, and I'm overwhelmed. Maybe I should turn this into a business. And that's really how Daasity got started.
What a great story. I love it. What's been the most challenging part of the journey so far?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a couple. So, early on, it was definitely sort of the scaling and sort of finding people to kind of help, like getting my co-founder, very daunting, and hiring our CTO. And now I think it's more around the landscape has changed so much in the last 2 to 3 years. And it's not that it's challenging necessarily in a bad way, but it's like, you definitely have to be on top of your game. And it's not only for us, it's really for consumer brands. We had this incredible surge of e-commerce during COVID, and percentage of spend in e-commerce grew dramatically. Then it kind of pulled back as we reopened. You've now got inflationary pressures, venture capital, and most of these e-commerce brands, so a lot of them venture capital backed, they've had to change the way. So we've had to change sort of the way that we're running the business very quickly, much faster than anything ever. And then you've got all these changing dynamics that we see ahead of us that are also kind of implementing a lot of change. It's like, man, the 2010s were kind of, at the time it was scary. It seemed all scary and kind of crazy and everything going on. Looking back, I'm like, it'd be nice to wish for those simpler days versus where we are today with a lot of things going on.
So some great challenges, great learnings. What's been the most fun part of building a company?
What I love is the people I work with and getting to help them personally in sort of their career and in their career and their growth, and then our brands as well, because I see the impact that we make with our brands and helping them on their journey, whether it's growing as a business, giving them insight, or whether it's they launch and are able to go into new channels and we're just in to support them. Unless you're happy just being a brand, it's I sort of like to say, if your brands can be sort of lifestyle brands where it's like, I'm the operator and I'm just happy kind of moving along, but most brands need to have some sort of growth. And you almost have little startups within your brand in that I've launched a new channel and I'm going back to the basics, or I've launched this and I'm going back to the basics. I'm trying this advertising channel. I'm going back to the basics. And our ability to help these brands through that transition and then to help them strategically improve their business is just really powerful.
So Daasity, you founded it. You've got a co-founder. You've been growing it. We met through one of your investors, which is really awesome. And tell us what the company does.
Yeah, so we are an analytics platform for consumer brands. I used to say for direct to consumer, but now we really handle data everywhere. So think of it as we connect to your own .com, your marketplaces. So if you sell on Amazon, Walmart, Target, and now your retail. So if you're selling in Costco or Target or Walmart, we're able to get all of that data together. And what's really important is I think of it as there's 3 pillars to being able to run your business. You need to know how much inventory you have. And as you get into different channels, that becomes harder. It's like, hey, when I have my .com, piece of cake. Now I'm in Amazon. what do I put in FBA and what do I put in and what I keep in my 3PL, right? It's like now you got to make those decisions. Oh, my decisions got harder. So there's an inventory component. There's a marketing component. Where are you spending your dollars? How much traffic is that bringing in? As you get into other channels, maybe you don't have measure of traffic. Those two things define what's driving your sales. And so I think of it as sort of three legs that you need to run your business. And our goal is to make sure that you have access to all of those three legs, no matter where you sell.
And what's the big challenge in putting those different data sources and pieces, the three legs of the stool together?
Oh, it's it's you try to do it yourself and it's almost impossible. It's just a ton of work. So things like Amazon doesn't have the concept of a customer, even though, because they're not your customer, they're Amazon's customer, right? So if you want to look at lifetime value of an Amazon customer compared to, say, your own Shopify or BigCommerce, you have to go kind of make up this customer and sort of try and sort of piece together all the orders together for that customer. That's something that we do. And then you think about like retail. Well, you get your sales data from your .com, you get every single order. From retail, you get kind of aggregated and they report on different time bases. So it's like, it's the business rules that you have in terms of putting everything together and sort of helping brands have a really good view and insight into this business, into your overall business, is what makes it so challenging, but also really fun. Because I don't know of anybody else that actually can do this.
It's so great. Now, your business overall is shifting more and more into retail and into all these channels. Talk to us about that, and how do you go about acquiring customers, and what do customers like about working with you?
Yeah, so we're moving a lot more into retail because our brands are. When I looked at Daasity customers, I think it was towards the end of 2022, it was something like 20% of our customers were in retail. When I looked at that again, sort of mid to late 2023, I saw that it was 80% of our customers were now in retail. And it wasn't that, and very few of them, I'll say, had their own stores. But brands have now realized, if I'm in cosmetics, or skincare, it's like, yeah, I have to be on Amazon, but I also want to be in Ulta or Sephora. That's the goal. And maybe Target and maybe Walmart, depending upon my category, but it's like, I got to be in Ulta and Sephora. If I'm a CPG brand, you have to be in Costco or you have to be in Walmart. And so what we've seen is a lot of these direct to consumer brands are saying, I need to be somewhere else as well. Or maybe it's a Nordstrom. I need my product to be there. And I think it makes sense. You have a lot of consumers that are very specific around certain channels. Viewers, for all the listeners, right? For all the listeners out there, how many of you know somebody when the first time they hear about a product, the first thing they do is open the Amazon and go search to see if it's on Amazon? It's like, that's what my wife does. I love ordering from the .com, but I know people are, yep, I'm going straight to Amazon. That's where I'm looking. So it's like, if your product's not there, you're losing a subset of customers. And people are going back to the malls and wanting to be outside or going to the Target. And so you can see that through, like, these businesses are starting to improve on the retail side. It's because people want to go and touch and feel and sort of see, especially in your fashion apparel or home goods or something. It's like, there's that desire for that kind of trial. And so I think you're starting to see more of this more and more, which is, it's not that e-commerce is going away. It's definitely not. But there's an element of, if you want to get in front of every customer, you almost have to be everywhere.
It's a great insight. Now, you were at Shop Talk earlier this year, building on this idea of back to retail and being with the physical product. You had some pretty insightful conversations, I understand. Would you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I talked to kind of a couple of brands, and there's a lot of concern in the e-commerce world around, well, what are we going to do without cookies, and what about attribution? It's so important. And some of the, I'd say, bigger, more omni-channel brands, the feedback to me was, all this attribution stuff, it's dead. And it was basically the perspective of, they almost need to go back to the CPG of the 80s and 90s, where the mantra was, only half of my marketing works. I just don't know which half, right? And so their perspective is, so there's a brand that's, I'm on Amazon globally, I have my own .com globally, and I'm in retail. And they basically said, my revenue breakdown is a third, a third, a third. And if you're telling me that if somebody sees my Facebook ad and they are only going to go to Shopify, to my Shopify site, you're crazy. I know that some of those people are going on Amazon, and some of those people saw that ad and now are going into Target and saying, oh, I saw that, I want to go check it out and I'm going to buy it. And the point was more around, we in e-commerce get very sort of singularly focused around the marketing and acquisition that drives to our website. And many brands are going to be elsewhere. And so the problem is now, how do you go measure your performance of your marketing across these other channels? And somebody can tell you that they can track what you're doing on marketing and going to Amazon. I mean, somebody will tell you that. I'll just tell you, it doesn't exist. It does not exist. Amazon is a walled garden. And that's what we're seeing on the player space, right? Apple's a walled garden. And so the challenge that we have is, and what these brands were saying is like, I'm basically done looking at attribution. I'm looking now more at just, what's my overall marketing efficiency? What did I spend and what did I get? And then conversely, maybe looking at things like media mix marketing, if they're selling in enough places. So they're going back to these like ways of analyzing marketing that were really big 20 years ago because of this walled garden.
It's such a great perspective on what really works. Now, you get to work with some of the world's leading brands. What are you seeing? What are the best ones doing really well when it comes to e-com marketing?
What I think they're doing really well is where a lot of brands haven't emphasized enough. And one of them is around retention. E-commerce and marketers are so focused so often on the acquisition because we're all about acquiring new customers. I will say the best brands from a performance perspective, from an overall sales performance, have a really good set of high value customers that always come back and buy again. And the key is two things. One is, how do I create call it sort of a loyalty program? And the other is, how do I think about retention? And one of the brands in the fashion space, in the apparel space, they think about male and female. So not only do they do retention around things like how frequently have you bought, how often have you bought, this traditional recency, frequency, monetary, but they also bring in things around, well, what products are you buying? And are you yourself male or female? Because it could be a wife buying for her husband, and sort of targeting the communication appropriately. The other piece is around this kind of loyalty, because often loyalty is thought of as just points, but understanding that not everybody needs a free thing, especially those advocates for you as a brand. What you can do is you can do exclusives. You get to buy our spring collection 2 weeks before everybody else. It's things along those lines. And so that's the two things that I think are going to be really important in terms of, and that's what's separating the really amazing brands that have this, what I call kind of retention layers, that is growing their overall businesses because they've done such a good job in getting customers to come back, and they're introducing new product. They're getting it in front of their best customers early on. They're targeting it through sophisticated email or creating these kind of loyalty plays. And those customers keep coming back and back and keep coming back and back. And it's helping the brand grow overall.
Dan, such great insights. Before I ask you about the future and predictions, retail media has been on a tear the last couple of years. You've been in the space, you've seen the ebbs and flows, you've seen online and in store. We talked about retention. When it does come to acquisition, what do you see these brands doing in terms of how they're thinking about spend across seems like so many different media opportunities now?
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, people are still spending the most on Meta and TikTok, and I think that's going to continue. The key is going to be how do you leverage data to be much more actionable? And so, I think of it as you have to use the I'll call them engines, these models that Meta and TikTok and others use. Like you have to leverage them, but the key is to start them on your best customers. So if you just so here's a very tactical example. If you just let the Meta go and build a model on everybody that's purchased, it's going to go find all your single buyers again. So what you need to do is go build a campaign around your best people and then use something like a conversion API to help feed and make sure that you're continuing to expand around those people. And that's, I think, the big gap is it's going to reduce your audience size, but you shouldn't want a bunch of one-time buyers. That's really bad for your business.
I feel like you've taken us full circle. Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, and multi-time buyers. There's something super insightful there that is so great. Well, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. Tell us about the next 12 months and beyond. What are you looking at? What are some of your key predictions in the space?
Yeah, I think for me, there's two. I do think you're going to see more and more brands focus on retention. If you haven't done that and really thought about a lot of those aspects and really how you're segmenting emails and maybe even getting into SMS or, if you're not doing SMS, you should. And also potentially direct mail. We're seeing a resurgence of direct mail, right? Haven't seen that since sort of the 90s, early 2000s. But I think you just can't do batch and blast. You have to be very targeted. And that's the key. That's the key for a lot of these things. It was just one size fits all and let me go execute and I'll focus on the acquisition. The other piece that I'm really excited about is what I call conversational analytics. So the ability to go into a tool and type in a question and it's going to give me data. And we could spend hours talking about that, but I think that's something where we've already seen AI kind of come and make an impact into like content and images. You're going to see the acceleration. I think it's going to take some time, but it's kind of like it's going to get faster and faster and faster as it makes its way into other areas. And that's the other thing that I'm kind of excited about.
Content and images with AI, as you know, near and dear to my heart here at It's Rapid. So I'm glad you mentioned it. And I totally agree with you. This idea of being able to interact and find the data and have the conversation, so powerful. So great predictions. I'll come back in 12 months. We'll check in, see how we did on the predictions. But Dan, before I let you go, if you're up for it, I'd love to ask you a couple of my rapid fire questions.
100%.
All right. So first off, and I know it's hard to choose just two, but which two people have inspired you the most in your professional life?
Yeah, I think there's two. One was a fellow by the name of Ron Eckhart. He used to be a general manager at HP, and he taught me a lot about people. I'm at heart a data guy. And so I love math and numbers, and I'm not like like big crowds and having to socialize. Definitely, it's like it's hard for me. And so him managing a lot of people and helping me learn about how to manage teams and everything has been so instrumental. And then it was at the same organization, but a fellow by the name of Brandon Black, who really gave me the opportunity to lead a department and take my first endeavor of doing that and understanding how he was a CEO and how he ran the organization and how he was thinking taught me a lot. Being able to just spend time with him and sort of think about and learn how he asked questions gave me a lot of insight into like, how do you run an organization?
Well, for what it's worth, if you hadn't mentioned it, I never would have known about the crowds because you seem like such a natural to me. So whatever you learn from all those interactions, definitely was valuable knowledge. So I'm happy for you on that. Now, outside of work and family, and I know as a fellow entrepreneur, work can be all consuming, but what are your favorite hobbies outside of those two things?
I live in Southern California, and it's crazy. I'll say I've not figured out how to work, how to surf or do anything like that. It turns out I'm only good on frozen ice. So ice hockey is one of my favorite activities. So I play ice hockey in Southern California. Crazy thing. And we didn't have a chance to kind of talk about Craft Cask and Cork. I love beer. Craft Cask and Cork was a company that I started through some family. I got asked if I could help export beer from San Diego to Asia. So I'll leave it at that. We can chat about that some other time. It was definitely a crazy and enjoyable experience. I'm glad I don't do it anymore. Not enough time to do everything. There we go.
What a great story. Speaking of which, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to find you online?
Yeah, check us out at www.daasity.com. Look me up on LinkedIn, Dan LeBlanc. You'll see me as the CEO and co-founder of Daasity. And if you have any questions about e-commerce data, I love this stuff. Drop me a line, shoot me a note to connect on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat and happy to chat with you and kind of help see what we can do to help you and your business take it to the next level.
It's so apparent. Well, thanks, Dan. I'm so glad Carly introduced us over at VMG. It's great. I really enjoyed talking with you today. I learned a ton. I know our listeners will have learned a ton as well. And I hope you'll come back and talk with me again.
Absolutely, Dave. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the time and have a great day.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Beyond the Shelf is brought to you by It's Rapid. It's Rapid is the platform Pepsi, Sierra Nevada, Revlon, and hundreds of other leading brands and retailers use to build personalized content at scale. Whether that's images, videos, or product descriptions for their product detail pages, shoppable videos or banners for their digital ad campaigns, or sell sheets for sales enablement, brands that use It's Rapid are able to produce high-quality, on-brand content on average more than 80% faster than category competitors. To find out more, please visit itsrapid.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Shelf.